So hello, thank you so much for getting me back in DynamicsCon. I absolutely love this event and I'm so honored to be able to do this even for the fourth time. Who am I? I'm Waldo. I'm Erik Wauters from Belgium. I'm a blogger. I'm a dev lead at my company. And yeah, as a dev lead at a company, I'm quite involved in anything that has to do with design guidelines and anything like that. And I would like to present you actually something that was born from DynamicsCon today in this session. What is that? That's the ALGuidelines Dev initiative. Let's dive into that. What I like to call what I would like to start with is the revival of the diamond. It's kind of like what it was born out of. And so I need to go a little bit into history. What is this diamond? Well, with this diamond, I mean the Nav Design Patterns Wiki. This is an initiative that was actually started back in the days by Microsoft, by Bogdana Botez. In my opinion, Bogdana is one of the great superheroes of Microsoft that, I remember her as being one of the best developers I've ever seen. Very geeky, very nerdy, and very into meticulously implementing the patterns and the guidelines that how it's supposed to be. Doing the job the right way. Now, she started the initiative at Microsoft by Microsoft the wiki, and that led into involving the community to document whatever there was already in at that time Navision or Dynamics NAV. It was all about documenting the patterns that we know from the product, that we knew at that point in CAL from the product, and also coming up with new patterns. It was all about documentation, but also involving the community, because she and her team very well knew that they are not all knowing, and the community was very creative in coming up with new and very creative solutions. That's basically what she did. She created a community. She created a way for us to document design guidelines and all that. And that resulted into what we call the Nav Design Patterns Initiative. So let me just show you what that means or what that meant at that time. Well, here you see it. On the community, dynamics.com, Microsoft created basically a wiki space where we were able, at least Microsoft was able, not we, absolutely not, were able to upload guidelines or patterns. This was the result, and you'll see that there are really a lot of patterns and guidelines. It's a little bit tedious to navigate them because you really need to click on this really small triangle, but that's where you get to the content of this site. Yeah, you see, for instance, here are lots of things that you might recognize. Number series, we all have implemented number series in our own entities probably. One of the things that I was quite proud of was this hooks pattern. Back in the days, in my opinion, one of the most important patterns that we could implement as, let's say, a generic pattern for let's say making our upgrades easier. Today, completely useless. This has been replaced by much better patterns and new platform additions like we now know as events. In any case, this is what we did, and this is what we ended up with. It's really a diamond. It's a lot of information that we were presented by the initiative at that point. You see here, by the way, also a lot of coding guidelines. These coding guidelines are actually Microsoft's coding guidelines back then. So every single check-in that I did, every single commit that I did, they were checked against these coding guidelines. So, but yeah, this is old, obviously. And this is actually also something that I already have demonstrated back in the days, because I did already a session about the AL development design patterns for the future. And back in that session, I was actually explaining like, look, we have this nav design patterns wiki. There are now new AL patterns, and we have events, we have extensions, we have new things that we need to consider, like upgradability, extensibility. So yeah, we kind of like have this diamond on the side, but we actually also, well, should be documenting new patterns, right? And back in the days, I actually, at this session, I announced like, look, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do something to involve the community to document new patterns to move this initiative ahead. And I really was blocked. I mean, back then, this was 2020, this session. And yeah, the only thing that I could come up with was actually this blog post. One of many, because you see this AL development guideline 1, and the idea was I had like lots of new guidelines patterns that I would like to document, and the only thing that I could think of is just putting them on my blog post, on my blog. So I created this blog post here as a reaction actually on something that Jeremy, Steve Endo, and Henrik and YouTube video that they did, like, look, there was the design guidelines and all that. So I wanted to explain a little bit more on that topic, and as being the first post of many regarding guidelines as such. What happened? Well, Jeremy happened. Jeremy actually came to me like, look, this design patterns wiki that has, well, it's a diamond on information, and that information is gold. Let's scrape that information, put it in something that we can actually maintain from the community. And you're obviously already thinking like maybe GitHub, because in GitHub we can actually contribute to the community. And yeah, maybe we can go from there. So all of a sudden I had a partner in crime. So somebody who's actually able to do that, like scraping the content from one side, moving the data into something that we can maybe build upon. This would have been a great kickstart for moving along to new content. Back in the day when I was doing that session for DynamicsCon about this AL patterns, I also was contacted by Henrik and AJ. So now that Jeremy was in play, I contacted these two again, and that was a good thing to do because Henrik had actually a good idea on how we could actually benefit from GitHub and move that into something readable, because that's what we needed. We needed something that the community can contribute to, like pull requests, let's say. Yeah, well, a readable documentation like a website. So how do we move that code to a website? And Henrik had an idea like, yeah, there are tools for that. And I will handle those tools today, what we do. So yeah, the idea came together, and well, we contacted Microsoft like, look, are we allowed to scrape the content from a Microsoft site and put that into some kind of GitHub that is basically from the community or from us? And Freddy came like, look, yay, maybe we can host this on a Microsoft GitHub to also get basically all the licensing in place, and being able to that there is kind of like a two-way connection, that Microsoft is able to contribute to code, and then Microsoft is able to learn from the code and use that in the product. So we have kind of like, if that would be true, a two-way connection, like we can contribute to patterns and Microsoft is listening to it, approving to it, contributing to it, and hosting it even. So yeah, that gave us actually quite a lot of benefits. And all these people together, yeah, well, a lot of work, I must say, makes that something that we call ALGuidelines Dev is born. And that is obviously what I would like to show you today as well, and go more into that. So what is it? First of all, the goal is to save what was already there. We absolutely do not want to lose any content from the wiki. And that includes the authors and obviously the patterns themselves. I find it very important that whoever wrote the pattern, whoever wrote the content, is still being mentioned as being the author of the content. We need to be able to still search to it because a lot of the CAL patterns still apply to AL. A lot of the guidelines still apply. So yeah, it makes all the sense in the world that we still have those around. But then we need to be able to describe new patterns, new AL patterns, take this extensibility, upgradability into account. All these new platform features like interfacing and all that we need to take that into account. We need to enable community contributions. There's a plan for that. There's GitHub, so we need to be able to let the community maybe improve already existing guidelines or comment on it in a discussion forum or write patterns or guidelines themselves. Yeah, and the involvement of Microsoft, well, that's something that I value a lot. When you look in this, you have heard me mentioning patterns and guideline quite a lot. What do I mean with that? Well, far most important is the patterns part. And when we look into a pattern or design patterns, well, this is what I found on Wikipedia. And software engineering and design patterns is in general reusable solutions to a commonly occurring problem. A solution for a problem. Also meaning when you don't have the problem, this is not a solution. It's kind of like a coding guideline, but for a specific case. Or as Jeremy put it, a pattern is like a flower on the right place. It's like a beautiful garden. On the wrong place, it's just a weed. It's kind of like what it is, right? Now, when we look at patterns versus a guideline, it's a question I get a lot. Well, there's a thin line between what is a pattern? Is this a pattern or is this a guideline? In my opinion, does it really matter as long as it's good practice? Either it's a pattern or the guideline, I'm fine. But to draw that line, maybe a pattern is more like a model or an example, while a guideline is more like a rule or a principle. Basically, you would copy from a pattern while you would implement the guideline. It's basically a standard. And maybe the best description I could come up with is like a pattern is actually only applicable in a few cases, like when you actually have that problem. It's designed for a solution for a specific problem, while a guideline should be able to be applied in all cases. It's always the guideline for doing that. Yeah? A guideline to create an API page, for instance. Knowing that, let's dive a little bit into the end result. So what I will do, I will just open ALGuidelines.dev. You see that here in the address bar, it's actually ALGuidelines.dev. It doesn't really look like a GitHub page. It doesn't really look like an MD anything. But yeah, do know this is a welcomes page. Probably have to work a little bit on it. But as you can see here on top, that's obviously where the magic is. And where all the patterns are and the documentations of the guidelines, that's where that you will find it here or here. And this is the real magic, obviously, right? And what Jeremy actually did as a first step is save everything that we had from the wiki. And that's actually what you can see here in the nav patterns archive. In this archive, you will actually see completely the same as what you could find on the wiki on the right menu bar. This time, a little bit more searchable and better readable and a lot more convenient to work on as well. So yeah. Obviously, we are not going to focus on the archive, on the CAL part. We should focus on the AL part. And that is actually what we decided to put into two categories, let's say, patterns and best practices or guidelines. Yeah. In patterns, you will find some. Guidelines, you will find more. And these are all basically AL specific things. And if we would contribute new things, obviously it will be AL things. AL guidelines or patterns, and that will be added to to this. if Jeremy did this job correctly, I should, and yes, still find my hooks pattern. And here you go. You've basically just find the same stuff. Okay, that being said, there is more to it. I can obviously search the site as well. Let's just say I'm searching for anything that has to do with subscribers. And you see here patterns and guidelines that have anything to do with what search term I search for. Now it kind of like displays the results. You have best practices, nav patterns, and patterns. Obviously, best practices and patterns is the new stuff, and anything nav is the old CAL contributions, right? Yeah, and you can just a way to search through patterns, obviously. Now, when you have opened the guideline of the pattern, you will always see tags and categories. So every single pipeline or every single guideline will have a tag or more and categories, which also means you kind of like have a tag cloud and yet another searchability thing. Like if you are interested in performance-related articles, well, we have two already. And there are a lot more to come, by the way, a lot of guidelines in terms of performance. Or here, telemetry, and then you will have a custom telemetry guideline. So these tags are really easy, again, for browsing around in these things. And then we have discussions. So here on the top right, you see that you have some links to things that are very specific to this case. So if I, for instance, go to this begin-end compound only, which is a guideline on how to work with the begin-end words, well, I can tell you there are some discussions about that. And that's also what the site ALGuidelines.dev is all about. Let's discuss these guidelines. Are they good? Are they bad? Are they bad? So you can easily navigate here on the top right to the discussions. And here you can see, for instance, there's one discussion that kind of like has this topic. And you see here there has been quite a lot of passionate discussions, which I love about this community. We're all passionate on what we do, obviously. So yeah, let's not go into that discussion, obviously. But last but not least, on the top of every page, you'll see the last commit that we did. A commit kind of like indicating that we are working with version control behind the system. Oh yes, we are actually hosting all this on GitHub. That's what you probably have seen here from the menu bar here as well. If I would go to GitHub, I will actually go behind the scenes. This is also where we are using the discussion forum, where we are using the issues forum, but also where we are hosting the files, the MD files, as I was explaining. That's what we are using. But I will go a little bit more into that later on. To end this part, why is Microsoft's involvement so important? Well, first of all, when it's hosted, it is hosted by Microsoft. You might have seen it already. Let me go back to the site. The GitHub repository is Microsoft's GitHub repository. Yeah, Microsoft is hosting this site. Microsoft is hosting this repository, and that kind of guarantees the continuity. I mean, if I stop doing this and Jeremy is stopping doing this, and basically all of us, well, Microsoft won't be able to stop this. And they will guarantee a follow-up. Sure, we are kind of like driving this. Microsoft is humping. They're kind of like moving along with us. They are not driving this yet, but at least it gives a certain continuity to the project, which I really like. They are involved in the approval process, which is for me most valuable. I mean, I have seen what Microsoft has been doing in terms of new code and new designs, and I absolutely like it. What I've done, for instance, with the system app, if you look into whatever new modules they come up with, the designs, the facade pattern, which I might touch later on, well, that is all. I mean, they know what they're doing, and having them involved in our approval process for our guidelines, I mean, makes all the sense in the world. And it has obviously also another direction, right? Whatever we come up with that they like, well, they might just include in their product as well. I mean, they're all involved, they're all support, and they all approve these guidelines and these patterns as well. As I said, you can contribute, and I would even say you must contribute, and we are counting on it, obviously. I mean, this is a community-driven thing, and I already have seen quite some patterns that I would really love to have described on the site, which we can all benefit from that. I mean, great ideas, great ways to solve problems. And yeah, how can you contribute, right? Well, as I said, it's on GitHub, so it's basically just fork, do your changes, and create a pull request. Yeah. Now you might guess, like, how does that work? Because I mean, there is a difference between like creating MD files and ending up with some kind of website. I mean, this is not an MD file. This is an HTTP file basically. So how do I do that? Well, sometimes it might be easier that you have that like a local copy of the repository, let's say, especially when you're like designing a new pattern where you want to like, let's say, see how it's gonna look like, right? Because an MD file, what you for instance see here, this MD file is looking great. Well, it's quite easy. Let me maybe look at another one. So you see some code examples, you see some headers and all that. But the code behind that scene, if I would go into the page source or the edit this page, that looks all different. I mean, this is the MD file, while obviously this is the HTTP file, right? So sometimes it's just easier that while you're developing that pattern, that you have a local installation of Hugo, so you can locally see how that page is going to look like. What does all that mean? We will see that in a minute. Do also know there is an approval process. That approval process is more than just having reviewers. We have 3 reviewers, so every single guideline and pattern will be reviewed by 3 people, including Microsoft. But there's also an automatic pipeline, which basically does that conversion from MD files to HTTP, the Hugo build pipeline. And there is also that license agreement, contributor license agreement that is mandatory for Microsoft to be able to like look at your code and, yeah, if possible, also use the code in, well, code in this case, the guideline and the pattern. Now I will touch a few things to show you a little bit on what that means to contribute. I mean, it's not that big of a deal. Obviously, this is also explained on the site. In the contribution part of the docs of ALGuidelines Dev, we have a few articles that explain you on how you can contribute. First thing that you need to know, there are templates. Yeah, basically copy paste this template file and you are already good to go. So like if you look at the template for a pattern, you already have all the headings that, well, we kind of like want you to complete. We want you to talk about what problem you are solving. We want you to talk about what is the situation that you do not want when you don't want to implement this pattern maybe. Because, you know, every pattern is also an anti-pattern if you implement it the wrong time or the wrong place. And we want you to think about that, right? And for a guideline, it's a little bit easier. Like usually it's just like, this is right, this is a good way to do that. So this is good code and this is bad code. So there are template files for that. So kind of like this is where you could copy paste from, right? And then we have this guide to fork and pull request. Well, as developers, you probably are already used to that, but if not, well, let me just quickly run through it. It's kind of like going to the GitHub part, right? And then you can simply fork, right? That kind of like means you cannot contribute straight into the Microsoft code base, let's say. That's what you would do if you would like branch and here. You're not able to do that, but you can create your own repository and contribute to that. and then create a pull request to the original repository, which is this one. So if you would fork this one, I will fork this to MySpace, I would be able to contribute some changes here. What I could simply do is I can even do this online. If I just press dot, I will go into the web Visual Studio, let's say. And I would be able to do some changes. Now, as you can see, I actually already did that, and it's taking my changes, which I previously did. So what I actually done, despite that I deleted this repository, you still see the changes. So probably GitHub does some fancy things that it remembers things that I did. So what you do is basically just copy the templates. In the content docs, you will find contributing templates, and here you can simply just copy and paste to the actual docs folder. So that's what I did. I pasted it here and renamed it to Demo DynamicsCon. And this is actually what you see. Well, it's just a copy paste, and this is basically where I would start to do some edits, right? Nothing much to see here. From the moment you're done, you're able to commit this. So you see, this is very alike to Visual Studio, by the way. And you see, when you all are watching, I cannot type. And there we go, we can contribute. So now I committed to my repositories. This is not a Microsoft ALGuidelines, this is Waldo's ALGuidelines. Yeah. So this kind of like means now I have an updated Waldo ALGuidelines part, and I should be able to contribute this to pull request this to Microsoft ALGuidelines. Now, this is something that, for instance, let me go back to ALGuidelines, that, for instance, Jeremy already did. So here you see a pull request from Jeremy, and you can also see how a typical pull requests would be handled. So you see some advice or questions or contributions from other people like Jesper from Microsoft, and you see here Hendrik that has had some issues with it or content issues with it, and you even see what issues. Well, you can show that. I will not go into that. So there is some kind of history, let's say, but all in the end, all of these were solved by Jeremy, and even Hendrik and Jesper have approved these. You can, by the way, also see the checks that is done. So you see this CLA check, and Hugo compiler kind of like is able to convert Jeremy's changes as well. So typically what I would be able to do, I can add my own review. I can review these changes as well. If I'm not completely sure, I can get these changes locally and would be able to look at them as well. So let me see if this is the right. So I already prepared this. So this is actually a repository from Jeremy. This is Jeremy's branch. And what I would be able to do, and that's actually what I meant with, you can actually also install Hugo locally. I can run Hugo serve, and this is actually now building the site on my local machine. So on my local host 1313, I am now actually able to look at the number series pattern as how Jeremy has described it. Now, to be able to do this, I obviously need to locally install that compiler and Hugo. Now, obviously, this is also something that we described. We have the install Hugo here. And what I simply did, I did this once. So I installed Hugo, let's say, it's through Chocolatey. And I installed the submodules once for my repository. Yeah. When you did this on a local repository, you are able to basically just run Hugo locally and simulate, basically convert the MD files to the HTTP files. And that's kind of like how the process works. Now, since I have reviewed, I didn't review it, so I can approve this. And kind of like means everything is done and we can confirm the merge. And this is actually when a new pattern is obviously being generated and being merged to our site. So in a few minutes, we should see that popping up right here. It does take, 2-3 minutes, because obviously Hugo compiler needs to run and take Jeremy's pattern and put that here as well. How do you apply this to your organization? Well, there is one simple thing. So what I think is you should do is to do a decent code review. Something that you should always do. Never underestimate the power of code review. This is how you keep the knowledge of your developers under control. You need to know what they know, and what they don't know, you need to teach them. And now you have an ALGuidelines Dev is a great resource. I would say it's mandatory knowledge to know, and it could be a basis for your company guidelines that you can refer to, you can teach to your developers. So that's kind of like all I wanted to share. This is the ALGuidelines Dev initiative. If you have any questions, I will be here in the online Q&A as well. See you in a minute. Hello.
There we are again.
Yeah, I quickly changed my shirt.
You did?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm glad you were backstage then.
Yeah. First of all, before we kick off, there's a background story to the demo, which I would like to apologize for. There was actually, during the recording, the demo didn't really work. And I know now why, because I prepared my demo and I deleted my fork. But apparently, in GitHub, if you delete your fork, the fork is not gone. So if you kind of like refork again, all your changes are back again. So that's kind of like something that threw me off during the demo, during the recording, actually.
It's kind of you, let's say, doing some Git learning live during the demo.
Yeah. So let's go into questions.
Yeah. Let's see. Well, actually, a couple of questions. Mm-hmm. Some are related. I copied them. So Christian was asking, and also replying to your question, if there will be an idea to have a real-world application with all the guidelines applied as a whole project that you can use and for reviewing, etc. So what about that?
Well, it's not planned, as I also answered in the chat. Yeah. But it's an interesting idea, and I would like to discuss that. I mean, I see two sides of that. Either we actually implement an application with example code, something depending from that wouldn't make much sense. So it depends a little bit on what Christian means, but I really would like to discuss that, absolutely, what the idea was. What we do have on the plate, or at least as an idea, what we would like to do is also foresee some kind of ALGuidelines Dev snippet collection. Yeah, you love snippets, I know. So actually, a snippet collection that even you would use, AJ, to implement patterns and maybe guidelines as well. That is on the table. I do have already quite some snippets in the CRSL language extension. There is even a snippet collection that is called design patterns. I can move that out and into the ALGuidelines Dev VS Code extension. I mean, it's just an idea still, but we have been talking about that.
All right. So that's great. Apart from the snippets then. Klaus was asking, and I think you already answered that in the session, how you suggest a new guideline, and also even if you had no idea how to describe it. So
yeah,
how would that work?
It all begins with an idea, right? And the ideas are as important as the written guideline, absolutely. So I would love to gather ideas. And yeah, we are on GitHub. So please enter them either in the issues session of GitHub or start a new discussion. For now, as you might see in the discussion session of the ALGuidelines.dev, the GitHub at least, you'll see some categorization. Maybe if I can just show my screen. I always love to show my screen, which is totally not prepared, as you can see.
There is a share button in the bottom.
Yeah, I know. Here we go. So let me try to go to ALGuidelines.dev, GitHub. And if you see here, I will zoom in just in case. To the discussion forum, we have two categories: best practices and patterns. I mean, if you're not really sure it's a guideline, it's a pattern, we don't really care where you categorize it. The thing is, the idea is the most important part, obviously. Exactly. If you just start a new discussion, you can already see they get tagged as well as being alive or to be described. And in this discussion session, you basically can see what is the progress and all that. It all starts with discussing the guideline or the pattern, and then the more information you gather, you'll see that the process starts to become an actual description of the pattern, and then it's just finishing off in describing that in a new MD file, basically. Yeah.
All right. So you can start a discussion even if you do have no idea how to create it yourself. I mean,
exactly.
Yeah.
Just great. A new discussion, and as long as it's logged, it's fine. We can start off with that.
Hey, and there are actually questions from Christian, but we have two questions in the chat. It's Christian Brownlich, who asked about references between MS Docs and AL guidelines. And also, there's another Christian Lenz, also asking a coupling between patterns, guidelines, GAL guidelines, or Dev and MS Docs or code cops.
Yeah, so there are actually already some concrete discussions on some content that will be interlinked. It's not the idea that we will describe one thing on two platforms, right? We're not going to put content or copy content from docs to AL guidelines or another. So yes, we will cross-reference, and we already had discussions, for instance, with the telemetry team to put some guidelines about telemetry, and there's already one, by the way, on the ALGuidelines.dev, and from the documentation in Microsoft Docs, they will link to ALGuidelines.dev.
You don't want to copy the docs, of course, into guidelines, or the other way around.
No, and ALGuidelines is not about how to do it. It's basically on what is the best practice on how to implement the pattern, right? There is a difference. It's about patterns and guidelines, not about how does the set load fields work. It's not about that.
Okay, then we have a question from Jason Talarczyk, or probably not saying that correctly, but he is asking, what about having another section of reusable pieces of code or common things that come up in the partner space when making customizations for clients? Reusable stuff.
Well, as I said, we are thinking about snippets, and that's kind of like reusable pieces of code. The idea is to put that obviously into a VS Code extension. We could make some kind of reference from that extension to the ALGuidelines.dev, or vice versa from the site to the snippets. Now, in the partner space for making customization for clients, in a way, any kind of guideline or any kind of pattern can be implemented either in a product or at customer side. So if it is a customization for client or if it is a product, doesn't really matter. It's a guideline and it needs to be implemented, or it can be implemented in either all cases or a few cases.
Right, but I would think also that reusable pieces of code quickly turn into a pattern, right?
Yeah, typically a pattern is something that you would be able to copy, and in many patterns, not all, but many patterns, you would be able to implement snippets. One of the examples that I'm coming up with, because I'm implementing that like crazy, is the generic method pattern, which is basically all around a kind of a code unit done in a certain way, and then it's easy to basically just have a snippet with that chunk of code that implements the pattern in one go. And it prevents bugs, because if you start to just type the pattern, you might not implement a few.
Snippets don't have bugs, right?
Well, let's hope they don't.
Okay, so we have a question from Christian Brandlich. How about pointing to other VS Code extensions that can help implementing the patterns guidelines? Or would Microsoft be okay with that?
I don't know why Microsoft would not be okay with that. I mean, this is not like Microsoft Docs, right? This hasn't have to go through kind of like a legal with I don't know what. I mean, this is still a community site. Anything GitHub.Microsoft or GitHub/Microsoft is still community and is still much looser than, let's say, Docs. So describing like VS Code extensions that might help implementing patterns and guidelines. Why not? It's a very good idea. I mean, 2 days ago, somebody had the idea to list books, and we are listing books now. It's still in discussion forum, but we are going to have some kind of reference with books that is interesting. And I think it makes all the sense for having VS Code extensions as well. Absolutely. Let's do it.
So the same question is also suggesting any collaboration between the Linterkop app and ALGuidelines.
Well, we already talked about that, but not concretely. We still need to like come up with, let's say, a meeting on how to do that. But yes, it makes all the sense to work together and to implement and vice versa, like to describe the guideline on ALGuidelines Dev and to implement the COP in the Linterkop. I mean, it makes all the sense in the world. So and we already, I mean, we are in touch, let's say.
And related to that, Tobias Gruber is saying, hey, what will the guidelines be added to the code analyzers in the official AL code extension?
Depends. I mean, many guidelines are already listed. And it might very well be that they would do that. I mean, again, do know Microsoft is on top of this, and if it makes sense that there is a new guideline that they didn't think of and still not in the code cops, then I don't see why they would not add it yet to their code cop. Absolutely.
And then Balaji is asking, any guidelines that you suggest to convert the code customized base app into an extension? And by the way, we have 1 minute left.
So that question in 1 minute. Well, AJ, you know what I'm going to answer this one. I mean, we have been working together on a project like that.
Yeah, we did.
And my way to do that is as a rewrite. Because in my opinion, the only way to implement the set of guidelines, the set of patterns that you really would like to do, is to do a complete overhaul.
Rewrite and apply the patterns like crazy.
Exactly. So and that is obviously not a conversion, and I know that's going to take quite a while, and I know that's going to be quite costly, but it's going to pay off at the end as well.
I think we have to stop here. If there are any further questions, I think we're going to be in the chat room, right?
I will.
Okay. Thanks all.